Have you ever felt uncomfortable in a crowd, even when there was no clear reason? Have you ever been in a group conversation where everyone seemed to be having fun, but all you saw were hollow repetitions, lame jokes, and manufactured opinions? Maybe you've asked yourself if something's wrong with you. Why is being around others so draining? Why do you feel more alive in the silence of your room than in a bar filled with loud laughter? If that sounds familiar, know this: you're not alone. And even, more importantly, this might be a sign of rare intelligence. People who are deeper, more sensitive, and more aware often experience a certain disillusionment with social life. It's not arrogance, not shyness, not trauma. It's simply clarity. As Schopenhauer once said, the more intelligent a man is, the more likely he is to be alone. But why is that? Because social life, the way most people live it, is a farce. A spectacle where almost everyone wears masks, follows invisible scripts, and says what they think others want to hear. It's an ego theater, driven by the need for acceptance and the fear of seeming odd. Few things are as exhausting as constantly pretending to be someone you're not. Take a closer look. How many conversations do you have that truly matter? How many friendships are built on truth rather than habit? Most relationships are held together by conventions, social obligations, mutual interests, or a simple fear of being alone. And when someone chooses to break free from this logic, they're quickly labeled as strange, antisocial, or snobbish. But is that really the case? Or, in a world of plastic relationships, could stepping away just be a healthy reaction from someone who refuses to live a lie? If you've started to see through this farce, you're already one step ahead. The next step is understanding why it becomes unbearable for more intelligent minds, and why being around superficiality can feel almost painful for those who see too much. It's hard to explain to someone who's never felt it. The discomfort during small talk, the quiet irritation when someone repeats a shallow idea for the 10th time like it's a great revelation, the mental fatigue that comes from social gatherings where no one's really saying anything. For those living on the surface, all this might seem normal, maybe even fun. But for those who feel deeply, it becomes suffocating. True intelligence comes with a kind of curse: consciousness. And consciousness has a price. It makes you unable to laugh at the same predictable jokes, to get excited about the same old drama, to join the same social circles where it's all about performance, not substance. The awakened mind sees the play, and that hurts. It reveals how much people avoid looking inward. And the more you think, the more you realize how everything seems designed to keep that from happening. Schopenhauer already pointed this out. Intellectual and emotional depth often leads to isolation, not by choice, but by incompatibility. It's like trying to fit a rare puzzle piece into a mass-produced set. It doesn't match. It doesn't fit. And eventually, you get tired of trying to shape yourself into something that makes no sense. Intelligent people struggle in mundane environments because their thoughts run on a different rhythm, a different frequency. While everyone's content discussing yesterday's viral post, they're pondering the meaning of life, the fragility of emotions, the contradictions of the modern world. This creates an invisible gap between them and others, a gap that can't be bridged with effort, only with acceptance. Understanding that you're not overthinking, it's that the world is under-feeling. This discomfort is real, but it has a noble origin. It comes from clarity. And the clearer the vision, the harder it is to keep playing the game. The way out isn't forcing yourself to fit in, but learning how to live with what that clarity demands from you. Silence, distance, and sometimes solitude. But what about that solitude? Is it a punishment or a liberation? It's strange to notice that the more you understand people, the more you drift away from them, and not out of resentment, arrogance, or pride. But because you realize most people don't actually want to be understood, they just want to be validated. You notice that your presence makes them uneasy, not because you attack, but because you don't play along. You don't fake it. You don't get excited about things you don't feel. You don't fit into the social dance. And that alone is enough for them to keep their distance. So the distancing happens quietly, without conflict, without drama. It's silent, natural, almost inevitable. You start staying quiet. You begin turning down invitations without much explanation. You stop trying to belong. You begin to prefer your own company. Not because it's always pleasant, but because it's at least honest. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. Solitude is the fate of all exceptional spirits. It's not a state of permanent sadness, but of purification. In it, you no longer have to try to be understood by those who don't want to listen. You simply exist, without filters, without performance. And paradoxically, it's in this apparent emptiness that the truest form of peace is born. For the awakened soul, solitude is like a temple, a space where thought can finally breathe, where ideas don't have to be diluted to fit into others' understanding, where you can be whole without asking for permission. Of course, it hurts sometimes. There are days when silence feels heavy, when you long for someone beside you, but not just anyone. You want a soul that vibrates at the same frequency. And because you know how rare that is, you choose absence over the wrong presence. You choose waiting over noise. You choose the honest pain of solitude over the empty comfort of forced company. And that kind of choice, while it may seem like renunciation, is actually an act of power. Not the renunciation of life, but of the distractions that prevent real life from unfolding. Because only when you can bear your own presence can you truly begin to know yourself. Then, silence stops being empty. Solitude stops being a punishment, and distance becomes a reunion with the one thing the world tried to make you forget: your true self. Over time, you learn that silence holds more power than many words. At first, it feels like a refuge, a safe space to hide from the noise outside. But slowly, it reveals itself as a weapon, a form of resistance, a gesture of refusal toward a world that constantly screams without really saying anything. We live in a time where everyone feels the need to have an opinion, to react, to take a stance, to be seen. But is all this talk really necessary? Isn't the excess noise just a symptom of inner emptiness? The more people drift away from themselves, the more desperate they become to fill the silence with gossip, judgments, memes, fake outrage, catchy one-liners. And those who refuse to join the game are seen as odd, indifferent, maybe even arrogant. But there's a kind of intelligence that learns to use silence not as weakness, but as a philosophical statement. To be silent is to say, I don't take part in this. It's to resist the frantic flow of instant opinions, the urge to be noticed, the compulsion to respond to everything. Schopenhauer put it plainly: noise is torture for intellectual natures. Silence, on the other hand, is the fertile ground where thought can finally bloom. Silence protects. It creates an invisible field around your awareness, a space where you don't need to react, only observe. And in that observation, you begin to notice what the noise hides: your true emotions, your contradictions, your real desires, and the peace that emerges when you no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone. There is courage in silence, because it takes strength not to respond to provocation, not to shout with the crowd, not to enter battles that aren't worth your energy. Staying silent is, at times, the highest form of preserving your sanity. And then, without even realizing it, you discover a kind of freedom that only appears when you stop trying to convince the world, when you stop speaking, and finally start listening. Not to others, to yourself. After some time like this, something deeper begins to surface. Most of your pain didn't come from others, but from trying to be accepted, from reshaping yourself, from pleasing. And when you realize that, a crack opens, and through it, light begins to pass. The need for validation is like an invisible leash. You carry it from a young age without knowing. You learn to smile when you don't want to agree when you actually disagree, to follow paths that were never yours, all just to be approved, welcomed, applauded. But the price is steep. Little by little, you start to fade away. There comes a moment when the soul screams. And that scream isn't against others. It's against yourself for betraying who you are so many times in the name of an acceptance that never truly healed anything. That's when true freedom is born. When you decide that you no longer need to be understood or accepted or praised. When you trade applause for authenticity. When you realize that living according to your own values may drive people away, but it brings you closer to yourself. The greatest achievement is to live without depending on the opinion of others. Schopenhauer. That takes strength. The world punishes those who don't bow to its expectations. And the loneliness that comes with this choice is real, but temporary. What remains after the pain is a rare kind of peace. The peace of being who you are, even when it bothers others. You begin to realize that real connections aren't formed when you're trying to please, but when you're being honest. Even if that honesty means losing people. Because losing those who only stuck around for your mask is not a loss, it's liberation. At this point in the journey, something shifts. The silence doesn't feel as heavy anymore. The solitude isn't as scary. And the gaze of others no longer has the power to determine your worth. Over time, you come to understand that there's a huge, and often invisible, difference between being alone and being isolated. At first glance, they seem the same. Silence, distance, absence. But inside, they're opposite worlds. One liberates, the other imprisons. Solitude, when chosen, is a space of strength. A cave where you find yourself again after losing your way, trying to please others. In that space, you can hear your thoughts without interference, rediscover forgotten desires, and see just how much you've been molding yourself to fit in. That's where you return to yourself. But isolation is different. It's when you pull away, not by choice, but because you feel like you can't be who you are. When your truth makes others so uncomfortable that they pull away. Or when you genuinely tried to connect, really tried, but no one truly listened. So you shut down. Not in peace, but in pain. It's a silence that aches, an absence that squeezes your chest, an invisibility that hurts. Schopenhauer understood this fine line. To him, the truly conscious person ends up isolated, not out of a sense of superiority, but because they see too much. And seeing too much can be a burden in a world that prefers to remain blind. That doesn't mean lucid solitude doesn't hurt. It does. But it's a fertile pain, a pain that teaches, that builds a kind of presence that doesn't depend on an audience. The key lies in turning isolation into solitude, in no longer waiting for someone to save, understand, or complete you, and beginning to be enough for yourself, not as an escape, but as a gesture of reconciliation with your own soul. Being alone, then, stops being a problem. It becomes a sanctuary, a silent home where you are enough. And suddenly you realize, those who've learned to be alone will never again bow out of fear of loneliness. Because they know there's loneliness in the crowd and peace in your own room. It all depends on who you are with when no one else is around. When you start to find peace in your own presence, the world seems to change, but in truth, it's you who now sees with different eyes. What once seemed like routine, distraction, entertainment, now reveals its true face, a system designed to keep your mind constantly occupied so that you don't think or feel or question. Ordinary people flee boredom like an enemy. The thinker welcomes it as part of the path. Schopenhauer. Modern society has created an arsenal of distractions. Social media, endless streaming shows, non-stop notifications. All of it designed to keep you from hearing what only arises in silence. The anguish, the emptiness, the soul's calling. These distractions are not accidental. They are part of a system that profits from your disconnection. A distracted mind is easier to control, to sell to manipulate. And the more intelligent you are, the more unbearable it becomes. Not because you think you're better, but because you see through the trick. You see that everything seems built to keep you from finding yourself, that every moment you're being told you need something outside to feel complete, likes to feel accepted, opinions to feel right. status to feel valuable. And when you stop, take a deep breath, and decide to stop chasing all of that, the system begins to break. You start to make people uncomfortable, because those who think too much don't consume the same way. Those who feel deeply aren't satisfied with shallow distractions. And those who've found meaning within themselves no longer need the empty promises being sold out there. That's when you finally understand your lucidity is a threat to everything that wants to keep you superficial, dependent, and obedient. That's why seeking silence, solitude, and critical thinking is more than a personal choice. It's an act of resistance against a world that wants to keep you distracted. By now, something inside you has already begun to shift. You no longer feel the urgency to fit in. You don't need to pretend as much. You can finally breathe outside the rhythm of the majority. And this is where one of the biggest challenges of being lucid emerges. Staying authentic in a world that demands masks at all times. It's not easy. The truth is uncomfortable. It creates friction. And when you start to show who you really are, with your contradictions, your depths, your values, you risk being rejected. Because most people aren't ready for someone else's truth. They're just looking for mirrors that reflect their illusions. Schopenhauer observed that truly wise people are often misunderstood, not because they speak in riddles, but because they live in a way that makes others uncomfortable. They don't follow trends, don't play social games, don't conform to collective falseness, and the cost of that is high: loneliness, judgment, exclusion. But the value is even greater: integrity, freedom, truth. Being authentic is a radical act because it breaks the invisible contract of social coexistence. Pretend to be like us, and we'll pretend to like you. Anyone who breaks this pact becomes unpredictable, and the unpredictable is frightening. People don't know how to deal with someone who doesn't seek approval, with someone who says no without guilt, with someone who would rather lose friends than lose themselves. Even so, something inside you knows continuing to betray yourself for the sake of comfort is no longer worth it. You've already tasted the emptiness of being accepted for something you're not. And now, you want something more: real connections, genuine encounters, exchanges without masks. That does reduce the number of people around you, it's true. But it raises the quality of your conversations, deepens the bonds, filters out the noise, and most importantly, it brings you closer to a kind of peace that only exists when you allow yourself to be whole, even if that displeases others. In the end, authenticity might scare the world, but it's far more frightening to live a life where you've lost yourself. Over time, after letting go of the mask, the applause, and the distractions, you begin to discover a different kind of freedom. A freedom that isn't loud or filled with symbols. It's a freedom that happens on the inside, quiet, almost invisible, but absolutely transformative. It's when you realize you no longer need anyone else's presence to feel whole, that the value of your existence lies within you, not in anyone's reflection. It's a kind of soul maturity, something that doesn't come with age, but through pain endured and silence embraced. Inner self-sufficiency isn't arrogance. It's not claiming you'll never need anyone. It's knowing that even in someone's absence, you don't fall apart, that your peace doesn't depend on someone else's mood, that your well-being isn't held hostage by public opinion. Happiness belongs to those who are sufficient unto themselves. Schopenhauer. This freedom is rare because it demands renunciation, letting go of the craving for acceptance, letting go of the need to always be right, letting go of the emotional comfort that comes from following the crowd. But those who walk that path discover something no crowd can offer: peace of mind. You may still engage with people. You can love, relate, share. But now it's different. Now you're no longer seeking completeness in the other. You're simply overflowing with what you've already found within. And that changes everything. Because love, when it comes from freedom, is light. Friendship, when it's born from truth, is solid. Life, when not driven by neediness, becomes authentic. To be free, at its core, is to owe nothing to anyone's gaze, It's to wake up and fall asleep with yourself, without shame, without guilt, without falsehood. It's finally inhabiting your own name with dignity, and then something unexpected happens. When you stop seeking acceptance, when you give up the need to impress, to please, to fit in, that's exactly when people start to truly notice you. Not everyone, but the few who are also tired of pretending. That's the paradox of acceptance. The less you need it, the more genuinely you attract it. Because the world is full of people starving for truth, but who haven't yet had the courage to stop performing. When they encounter someone who already has, someone who lives with authenticity, even in silence, even alone, they feel something different. A natural respect, a quiet admiration, not for appearance, but for presence. Schopenhauer understood this. He knew that the deepest individuals are, at first, avoided. Their presence unsettles the complacent. Their clarity shakes others' certainties. But over time, the very solitude that once felt like punishment becomes a kind of magnetism. You're no longer chasing. And that's why people start to come closer. But now you see clearly. You no longer mistake applause for affection. You no longer trade authenticity for belonging. You understand that very few connections will be real, which is why you learn to value them so deeply. The respect you inspire now doesn't come from what you represent, but from what you uphold in silence. Integrity, freedom, truth. Still, not everything outside is empty. Sometimes, amidst the noise, rare people appear, quiet souls, conscious ones, who have also walked inward. They do exist. And when you meet one of them, even for a moment, everything makes sense. These encounters require no masks, demand no performance, and aren't afraid of depth. They embrace it. And in those moments, hope is born. Perhaps the way forward isn't only in accepting solitude, but in creating spaces where authenticity can thrive, seeking real conversations, even with a few, joining smaller, more intimate circles where being matters more than appearing, reading, writing, listening, observing, or even creating your own bonds, your own sanctuaries, places where truth can finally breathe. And all of this became possible because, at the beginning, you had the courage to step back, to think for yourself, to question everything, to be alone, to lose, yes, but without losing yourself. You are not strange for preferring solitude, nor cold for choosing silence, nor arrogant for rejecting social performance. Maybe you're just more awake, more aware, and because of that, more free. And now, after all you've lived and learned, a real question rises. Do you truly need a social life to feel complete, or just an honest life with yourself?